All right, so my name is Misty Wilson-Mertens. I'm the department chair for Behavioral and Social Sciences at TCC Connect.
And my name is Dr. John Lundberg, and I am a professor of history at Tarrant County College South.
So we're both native Texans, and we were both fairly young when the David Koresh incident happened. There's the 25th anniversary on Thursday, so we thought that this would be a good time to reflect on it and see how we got there and why. All right, so as we go, if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them here, and then we'll try to answer them at the end. All right, so the Branch Davidians really get started way back in the 1800s with William Miller and the Millerites. William Miller was a farmer. He's a veteran of the War of 1812, and he believes by reading the books of Daniel and Revelations that he has figured out this biblical code, and he is going to be able to predict the second coming of Christ. So he's going to gather about 50,000 followers, which we're going to call the Millerites. They are going to gather at his farm, and they're waiting for October 22nd, 1844. This is actually the second time he predicts the end of the world. The first time is in 1843, second time is in 1844. After the second time doesn't happen, it becomes known as the Great Disappointment. So a lot of his followers leave, they start going back to their farms, back to their lives, but the ones who stay are going to eventually become the Seventh-day Adventists. So the Seventh-day Adventists are one of our early American versions of Christianity. They're going to believe in a Saturday Sabbath, so church is on Saturday, not Sunday, and they're going to be all about the imminent second coming. Everything is focused on this end of the world scenario. They also believe that God uses prophets to deliver messages. To me, one of the really interesting things about the Adventists is that they don't consider the education or the gender, or really anything about the background of the person that is their new prophet. So one of their early important prophets is going to be Ellen Gould Harmon White, and she's going to preach in the 1840s a gospel called the Present Truth. This is the idea that not all of God's wisdom and truth could be revealed in the Bible. So because of that, living prophets have to keep revealing the new truths to us. There's always going to be a living prophet that can interpret God's intentions or goals for us. The Davidians are going to develop from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, founded by Victor Hutef. He's a Bulgarian immigrant. He is going to found the Davidian group that splits off from the Seventh-day Adventists in 1929. He breaks off from the big group of the Seventh-day Adventists because he believes that they've become too worldly. The women are wearing makeup. They're not wearing long skirts. The men are listening to popular music instead of gospels. So he wants to move them back to a more secluded, more isolated lifestyle to keep them pure. And to do that, he's going to move everybody to Texas. So in 1935, Victor Hutep moves his group to Waco, and they create the original Mount Carmel. It's on about 400 acres, just right outside of Waco. When he dies in 1955, we're going to see the first transfer of power in the Davidians, and he's going to transfer that power over to his wife, Florence. So when Florence takes over, she's going to sell Mount Carmel, and she's going to create new Mount Carmel, about 9 miles further away, a little bit more outside of Waco, about 900 acres this time. And Florence is going to get back in this game of predicting the end of the world. So April 22nd, 1959, supposedly, is going to be the end of the world. When that doesn't happen, the group is going to split once again. And the second time this Davidian group splits, we get the Branch Davidians.
Okay, so in 1959, the Branch Davidians split off, and they're organized by Ben Roden, who is a West Texas businessman. Roden claimed to be the new prophet. He adopted a new present truth for the group, focused them on the establishment of the significance of the restored state of Israel. Of course, as you know from history, Israel is created as a state in 1948. And he establishes a small community of followers at Mount Carmel. Now, he kept the Saturday Sabbath, but also instituted the Jewish Old Testament feasts of Passover, Tabernacles, and Atonement as 8-day observances. When Roden died in 1978, his wife, Lois, became head of the group.
All right, so Lois Roden, she is going to take power in the 1970s. So if we're putting this in historical context, we're right at the height of the women's rights movement. So when she starts talking about her present truth, it's really interesting that she centers it on something that she calls the female characteristic or the female character of the Holy Spirit. So she believes that God is this dual identity, that there's a male and female force to it. If God has a female force, we can therefore ordain women to preach. Now, she's going to claim that this has nothing to do with the women's rights movement, that she's not at all influenced by feminism. But the interesting thing here is if she doesn't come up with this, then she's going to have to find some way to explain why she should have power and not her son George. So this is a really interesting time where theology and history are combining in this way for her to put her political truth into this theological truth. All right, so she is going to be challenged for control of the Branch Davidians by her son George. He's going to offer a gender challenge to her because he's male, and also some theological arguments. He believes that he should be the next prophet, that it should pass from his father to him. Unfortunately for George, he is mentally unstable and he is at times violent. He's openly carrying a weapon all around Mount Carmel, and whenever he's angry, he is going to threaten people. So it's in this atmosphere that the guy that you guys probably all know is going to show up.
So let's talk about Vernon Howell. Vernon Wayne Howell was born in Houston in 1959. His mother was a 15-year-old single mother. He never knew who his father was. He was raised by his grandparents until mid-childhood. He later would describe his childhood as lonely, so the other kids teased him. He was dyslexic. He was a poor student, dropped out of high school. But he had a musical ability and a strong interest in the Bible. At 20 years of age, in 1979, he attempted to return to his mother's church of Seventh-day Adventists, but he was expelled for being a bad influence on the other young people in the church. In 1981, he moved to Waco to live at Mount Carmel. It is apparent that he seduced Lois Roden and that they engaged in a sexual relationship. They traveled together to Israel. And by the way, she is in her late 60s at this time, and he is 22. They traveled to Israel. He believed God spoke to him. He changed his name unofficially at that point to David Koresh. David suggesting his messianic task, and Koresh in a suggestion that his role was to destroy the enemies of God, as King Cyrus had destroyed the Babylonians, the enemies of Israel. Legally, he changed his name in 1990. When Lois, it is apparent that at this time, David Koresh was planning on seizing control of the Branch Davidians when Lois passed away and seizing the power away from George. Lois recognized Koresh as her successor in 1983, as he wanted. And Koresh, of course, did not get along with George Roden, who felt he should have been the heir apparent. And when Lois passed away, George actually pushed Koresh and his followers out at gunpoint.
So Koresh and his followers are going to leave Waco, and they're going to head to Palestine, Texas. And it's while he is in Palestine that Koresh is going to marry his only legal wife, but his first what he called spiritual wife. He's going to marry 14-year-old Rachel Jones. Rachel is from a pretty prominent family within the Davidian circle. Her father, Perry Jones, is one of the most senior and respected members of the Davidian community. He's been there since the very beginning. He was one of the earliest followers of Benjamin Roden. Perry, because his daughter is 14, actually does have to go down to the courthouse and sign a legal document for his daughter to be able to marry this 22-year-old man. And Perry willingly did this because he believed that Koresh was a prophet. So he thought he was doing right by his daughter and putting her in his hands. Within just a couple of years, they'll have a couple of children, I think a boy and a girl early on. All right, so as Koresh's group is in Palestine, he is going to try to build his following. He's going to visit Israel, England, Australia, where he gains quite a few followers. And then in addition to that, he's traveling back and forth between the two coasts. Spends quite a bit of time in California. In 1987, Koresh is going to attempt to take Mount Carmel by force. And this is a very bizarre incident. George Roden is going to challenge Koresh to like a profit off. George Roden dug up a body that had died and challenges Koresh to raise the dead. Koresh wants proof of this, so he and 7 male followers are going to break into Mount Carmel at night dressed in camouflage, and they end up getting into a gunfight with Roden. Their goal was to take a picture of the body to show the police that he'd been desecrating the dead, but they're not successful. Instead, during this gunfight, Roden is shot in the chest and the hands. The police are obviously called, they show up, and Koresh and his men are arrested for attempted murder. During the trial, they are going to acquit all of his followers, and then for David Koresh himself, it's a hung jury. At the same time that trial is going on, George Roden is actually going to attempt to kill someone else, so he goes to jail on an unrelated charge to that. And then once he's in jail, David Koresh and the Branch Davidians can return to Mount Carmel, and they claim ownership of it just by paying the back taxes. So now established at Mount Carmel, David Koresh is really, truly in charge of the Branch Davidians. So he's going to present his present truth to the church. His present truth changes the very nature of the Branch Davidians. So first, he's going to begin stockpiling weapons and ammunition. This is a huge change because the Davidians under the Rodens were pacifists. They didn't believe in war, they didn't believe in violence, and now he's actively training his people to shoot, to drill, essentially almost living like a paramilitary group. He's going to announce that the King James Bible is the only true, uncorrupted translation of the Bible, and that he himself is the only living person who can interpret Scripture. In August of 1989, he is going to issue his most profound change to theology to this point, something called the New Light. So the New Light says that all females in the community now belong to Koresh. This includes all married women. So all of the previous marriages are annulled, and all of the men are now forced to be celibate. Essentially, what Koresh is trying to do here is make sure that he is the only male that's allowed to father children. He believed that he was going to father, the sources here vary, but somewhere around 24 children who would then eventually become the guardians of this new world after the Second Coming, and they would have this role to play in this post-apocalyptic world that was going to be brought about. To prepare everyone for this world that's coming, he's going to make the group train in survivalist tactics. He's going to make them eat MREs, military rations, and he's going to keep on hand a large group of weapons, ammunition, and propane.
So, as Koresh has seized control of this sect and established himself essentially as a cult leader at this point, there are allegations leveled against him of child abuse from some of his former followers. For spilling milk, children were struck with a wooden paddle. To train for the final battle, children were instructed to fight each other, and if they did not fight hard enough, they were paddled. There were also accusations that he was taking his followers' daughters as wives. Kiri Jewel claims that she became Koresh's youngest bride when she was just 10 years old. By Jewel's account, Koresh had as many as 20 wives by the time he died. Following a siege, DNA confirmed that he was in fact the father of a number of these children, fathered with these very underage girls. Now, based on a tip from a postal worker, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms suspected the Branch Davidians of stockpiling illegal weapons. The ATF obtained a search warrant for the compound and arrest warrants for Koresh and a select few of the group's followers. The ATF surveilled the compound several months before the siege. Former members claimed that they knew they were being watched. The ATF obtained a search warrant on suspicion that the Davidians were modifying guns to have illegal automatic fire capability. The raid, codenamed Operation Trojan Horse by the ATF, occurred on February 28, 1993. It was supposed to be a surprise attack on the compound. ATF agents told reporters, and a reporter told one of Koresh's followers, so that's how word got out. The ATF planned for 76 special agents to serve the search warrant. They estimated that about 100 Davidians were in the complex, and a gun battle broke out between the Davidians and the ATF. After 45 minutes of shooting, the ATF agents withdrew. They negotiated a ceasefire via phone, and in this firefight, 4 ATF agents were killed and 15 wounded, the highest casualty rate of any ATF operation to that time. 6 Branch Davidians were fatally wounded, several injured. David Koresh was also wounded during the raid, and all of this, of course, set off a 51-day siege.
So this siege is going to last from February 28th, 1993 to April 19th. This siege is going to be really complex because you're going to have the FBI take over from the ATF. In addition to that, you're also going to have local law enforcement. So at the height of this siege, we have about 900 law enforcement officials surrounding this compound from all different agencies. We've even got some Texas Rangers out there. That complicates the matter because you don't have a hierarchy. You don't know who is necessarily outranking who at that point. Within the FBI, we're going to have some tensions because the FBI negotiators are at odds with the hostage rescue team. Now, these are both groups of FBI agents, but the negotiators are trying to play into Koresh, give him what he wants, while the hostage rescue team, who's in charge of the tactical part of this, really just wants this thing to end. So the hostage rescue team is going to do things like blast loud music. They're going to play some really terrible sounds like rabbits getting executed. And the idea is that they're going to eventually drive the Davidians out of the complex. They're also going to bring in vehicles to crush the Davidians' cars, essentially destroying their property. The goal for both the negotiators and for the hostage rescue team was to get the children out. That was what they said they were trying to do, but obviously that doesn't exactly happen. During the last days of this siege, the newly installed U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno is approached by the FBI, and she's given several options. The FBI is really pushing her to approve an assault on the compound. The FBI wants this to end. It's been on the news every day for 51 days. It's time to get this thing done. So Reno is going to be told that there are children inside, that the children are actively being abused, and she is going to go ahead and to approve this assault. President Clinton, for his part, is hesitant. This is partly because in his home state of Arkansas, there was a separate group called the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, who had had a similar standoff in 1985. And in that standoff, the tactic was just to wait them out. And eventually, they had to leave. The FBI thinks that won't work with this group because they're so well stocked. So on April 19th, 1993, we are going to see the final assault begin at 6 a.m. The FBI begins by launching tear gas into the complex, and within a few minutes, we're going to see gunfire erupt. By 11:40, the initial assault is over. But about 20 minutes later, we're going to start to see flames around the complex. We now know that there were fires in 3 separate areas that all merged into one very big fire. By the end of the day, 76 Branch Davidians have been killed, including 25 children, and only 9 were able to survive the fire.
The government's handling of the situation drew sharp criticism. Janet Reno later expressed regret for authorizing the raid. In 1999, the media revealed that some of the tear gas used by the FBI was flammable. In 1999, Reno also appointed John Danforth to investigate And Danforth concluded the U.S. government, quote, did not cause the fire, nor did it shoot at the compound. Many people, of course, disagree with those findings. Some people view the Waco siege as governmental abuse of authority. It spurred the growth of militias. It also inspired Timothy McVeigh to bomb the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City 2 years to the day after the end of the Waco siege on April 19th, 1995.
All right, so we have some questions that we've written out to ask each other to see what we think. But at this point, I also want to open up to student questions. So if you guys have any questions, please type them in the box. And as you do that, I'll go ahead and ask John the first question I have for him. So do you think that the government had enough cause to actually issue this search warrant?
Yeah, I think they did have enough cause. You know, Koresh was already wanted for questioning by Child Protective Services in Waco because of the allegations of child abuse against him. You add that to the postal workers' discovery of them stockpiling potentially illegal weapons, and I think that there's more than enough cause for the search warrant to be executed on the Mount Carmel compound. Now, Misty, in all this, what do you think went wrong?
I think what happened with that postal worker tipping off a reporter, or the reporter tipping off the postal worker, is really where this thing fell apart. So the story goes that there is a reporter who is supposed to be covering this, and he gets lost. So he stops to ask a postal worker where he needs to go. And that postal worker happens to be a brother-in-law of David Koresh. So at that point, when the ATF no longer has the element of surprise, they should have called it off. And they should have waited till David Koresh either left the compound to go to town, or he was out jogging, or what have you. He was known to go to town quite a bit. So they could have arrested him without this being the drawn-out siege that it was.
So we have a question, and the question is, what do you think the government should have done? And my answer to that, and I'll turn it over to Misty in a second, my answer to that is that I believe they should have arrested Koresh on the many occasions that he was in Waco when he did not have the protection of the compound. They should have arrested him on suspicion of child abuse. And I think if they had arrested him when he was in Waco, as opposed to waiting for him to be at Mount Carmel, that all of this could have been avoided.
But let's say we get past that and we're actually to the point of the siege. I think the other thing the government did wrong is they had FBI specialists and negotiators, but they didn't have any scholars there. Mm-hmm. So they needed some religious scholars. They needed some historians to come in and explain where this was leading to. Because if you look at David Koresh's theology, it's all about the end times. Mm-hmm. So he's creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. Mm-hmm. If he's talked about we're going to have this final battle, there's no way he can back down.
Yeah, you're playing right into his hands. Mm-hmm. You're playing right into the hands of his end times theology.
All right, so we've got another question here. What was the stance of Ann Richards? I don't hear much about how she might have been involved.
Yeah, Ann Richards knew a political catastrophe when she saw one. She offered the support of the Texas Rangers, but beyond that, she referred all questions to the FBI and to the Attorney General, to Janet Reno. Richards was not going to make any independent decisions on this. She was going to defer to federal authority and stay out of it as much as she could, frankly.
And also keep in mind, this is Clinton's first year as president.
Right.
So a lot of people are looking to him for leadership on this.
Right. He's only been in office for 3 months at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very democratic of her. Any other questions? All right, so I've got one for John. What do you think is the legacy of this siege at Waco?
Well, I think there are a lot of negative legacies that have come out of Waco, maybe a few positive ones. Whenever you see government raids now by the ATF, generally you see more coordination. You saw the creation of the Department of Homeland Security in 2001. That was in response to 9/11, but that has also helped to streamline, the federal bureaucracy when it comes to coordinating agencies like this. But I think this episode, more than anything else, it just served to deepen the distrust that people have in law enforcement and in the government in general, especially among the segment of militant nationalists that we would call the militia movement or militia groups. And I think it's caused a lot of people to, this is one of the incidents in the 1990s, caused people to start stockpiling weapons and training for their own end time scenario or race war or whatever other scenario they've concocted in their heads. So I think there's a lot of negative legacies to Waco.
Well, and you can't really separate it from the Oklahoma City bombing.
No, you can't.
Because there's a direct line from
Yes.
Waco to Timothy McVeigh
Yes.
to that bombing.
And remember that April 19th is already something that's celebrated among militia circles because it's the anniversary of the beginning of the American Revolution, the battles of Lexington and Concord on April 19th, 1775. And so militia groups that distrust the government already have a reason to celebrate this day. And it just it elevated April 19th to a whole new level with the end of the Waco siege and then, of course, with the Oklahoma City bombing.
All right, can you read that question, John?
Okay, so we have a question. We have a comment and a question. This is no question, but I find it mighty funny that Koresh spoke highly of the King James Bible, yet he felt that he should be with all the women and children. It is very sad that these cults manipulate people and so many children are affected. Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I don't think that David Koresh, at this point, he was following his own gospel. He was not following anything to be found in the Bible or any other religious text, accepted religious text for that matter. Koresh is following his own counsel. And so, one of the things about Koresh is that he confessed to being oversexed. And so that was supposedly one of his sins when he first joined the Mount Carmel community, and probably should have raised a lot more red flags than it did. But nevertheless, he was able to gain control.
Well, and the one thing he did that was sort of like an evil genius is he said this version of the Bible is the only one that's right. Oh, but I'm the only one that can interpret it.
Yep.
So even if you read it,
Yep.
It doesn't mean what you think it means. It only
Right.
means what I say it means.
And I mean, that's a play. That's a play right out of all cult leaders' playbooks. This religious text only means what I say it means.
All right. If there are no other questions, then I'm going to go ahead and post the link for you guys to get credit for this. So those of you who have done this before, you know what to do. I'm going to post a link here, and this is going to take you to a Google Doc, and you're going to fill out a form. That form is how you get credit for attending, and that feedback that you give will be shared to Dr. Lundberg and to myself. So be thoughtful. Tell us what kind of things you'd like to see or hear in the future. And if you come up with a question that you want us to answer, put it in that form, and we will get back to you.
And thank you all for listening and being with us this evening.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.